Okay. The next item on the agenda is an ECRA program discussion or report. I'm gonna
Go ahead.
I'm gonna ask that we hold off any questions or comments until the report's done, then we'll circle back to this side of the board, and then we'll circle over to this side of the board. This is another discussion about the administration informing the board how the ECRA people are providing them information and how they use it. Dr. Skinkis?
Yeah, Kristen and Kylie will present the information. The idea is not necessarily to get into the data. It's just back in October when we did that contract review of ECRA, I wanted to make sure that the administration regularly reports out on how they're using ECRA so that the board can feel reassured that we're getting our money's worth with the services from ECRA. Kristen?
So as Dr. Skinkis said, this is just a sample report that we receive from ECRA in regards to a program evaluation. So we don't want to focus on the data because the reading program evaluation is just one of the many program evaluations that ECRA has done for us. So if you look at page 6 in the board packet, you can see that first the program evaluation provides some global feedback to us. So it tells us the percent of students meeting benchmark that are in the program versus not in the program, and that's referring to an ACT benchmark that's appropriate for that particular program.
Despite the sample, is that accurate numbers behind it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we pulled this from the report. And then from there, the report also goes into detail about the percent of students that exceeded growth, met growth, or failed to meet growth projections, both in the reading program or any program that we look at versus students that are not in the program. So just as a reminder, growth refers to the amount above or below a student's actual score in comparison to the predicted score. So expected growth is 0 because that would mean that a student met their projection. But anytime you make a projection, there's always a margin of error, and so that's represented in the expected growth, which according to the color-coded buttons is green. So that's at negative 0.29 to positive 0.29. So anything above that would be more than expected, and anything below that would be less than expected, and then starting to look at the causes or potential causes for that growth. The most value that we receive from a program evaluation is from there we can log into the online portal and go into great detail about every specific student. So on the next page, on page 7, it highlights some of the students, and then you can look at each individual student to see which students exceeded growth, which students did not exceed growth, so that we can begin to look at course-taking patterns and other characteristics of students that are in the program that were successful versus students that were in the program and may not have grown as much as they should have. From there, we also then analyze this data in more detail with whatever staff members are associated with the program, in addition to building administration. So I'll let Kylie touch on that piece.
The section that talks about some of the sample changes that we've made to our reading program specifically as a result of this data is really just a snapshot of, like I said, sample of changes based on one report. So these are in particular targeted and specific changes that we were able to make and make the decisions to make to a specific program that we wouldn't have necessarily known that we needed without the data. So the data that we receive from ECRA allows us to look at where we want to focus our energy and where we want to focus our time into what changes need to be made based on what we can see is working and maybe is not working with our students. It's not, there was a question about would changes of this nature have been made without ECRA. It's not necessarily that ECRA is the only thing that drives us deciding that we need to make changes to curriculum or that we need to put our resources in one place versus another. What it is more so is that we're able then to focus our energy, and we're not essentially going off of hunches. We're using the data to tell us where we would best be able to put that energy. There was also a question about when FTE increases are brought to the board, they're not necessarily, there isn't a rationale behind them that has anything to do with ECRA, and that is true. Generally, when proposals based on FTE are brought to the board, those come from something that Kristen and I would sit down with Dr. Skinkis, and at the building level, we would look at what changes we need to make based on the data that we receive, and we wouldn't necessarily come to the board and say, we want to shift. For example, when we added back a rotation into CAP because our reading data showed that it would be beneficial for our students to have a reading rotation in our CAP class. That's not something that we brought to the board to say, here's how we want to use that 0.2 FTE, because those are the decisions that Kristen and I are charged with sitting down with Dr. Skinkis and kind of hashing that out at the building level. So the data shows us what sort of things we need to start talking about and in what ways we can focus our energy based on the success of our students. So I'm not going to go through exactly and read these to you. I know that you've seen them, but we wanted to be able to show you these are some of the things, and as I said, just a sample of some of the very beginning stages of when we receive information from ECRA. How can Kristen and I start to sit down and look at, okay, what does the success of our students or the growth of our students tell us about our programming? And then we are able to, once we have some of those conversations, bring those conversations to Dr. Skinkis and continue that conversation at the building level of making certain that we are making the appropriate choices with our resources based on the information that we have. So while we always are making curriculum decisions or decisions about FTE, and ECRA isn't the only thing that drives those decisions, it certainly helps us make them because we are able to look at our actual students and what sort of success they are experiencing in our classes, and that tells us, hey, we need to make these tweaks for our students. And so we're able to put much more focused and strategic energy rather than working off of hunches and kind of maybe this will work and sort of a trial and error. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're theorizing, and ECRA allows us to not speak in theory of we think this is what we need to do. It allows us to see, yes, the data is showing us, the numbers are showing us that we need to focus some more energy here. We need to make these changes.
And once ECRA completes a program evaluation for us, we can then go in year after year after year and look at new students that go through that program to determine whether or not we're seeing the same pattern with that new set of students, or whether or not that the new interventions that we have put in place have worked, or whether or not we need to continue to look at additional areas of improvement within that program.
What happens when, so obviously we didn't produce the full report for the board because it's not a report that we're giving data to the board, it's a report that you're using at the building level. But
what does that mean when they say we're not giving it to the board because we're using it at the building level? You hear that like that? I'm a board member, I don't even know what that means.
so before you came in, there was an introduction that the idea of doing these regular ECRA reports was to show the board that the building administration is using it and getting the full value of the contract. This is not necessarily a report on our reading program to the board. So we've done like multiple program evaluations, so they just wanted to show you a sample of, we do these program evaluations, then we realize from the data, are we putting enough resources to it? Do we need to change the curriculum? Do we maybe need to change the teacher that's teaching the class? Those types of things. So it's stuff that's driving their decision making at the building level.
And when we say it's a building report, it's because the benefit of the report is being able to dive down into the individual students, and that's not typically something that a board would do.
The problem I have with it is there's some districts that have all kinds of bills, like District 96, right?
Sure.
So,
We have one building, we have one district, so isn't a report for the building a report for the district?
No, not in the same sense, because it's not, it's our job as the building administration to look down into the student level to identify which students are being successful, which students are not, to come up with patterns and then to identify, what additional interventions that we need to put in place. But at the board level is where we report out on the district goals and whether or not we're making adequate progress towards ACT as a whole or AP as a whole, but it's not to look down at the individual student level like we can with ECRA to identify, here's a student, this was their growth level, here are the courses they've taken.
I understand the
here's why
difference
we
between a
think they're
student
successful and
report
not.
and a board report, but I don't understand the difference between a building report and a district report when the district has one building.
Well, I have a question, maybe at least this sample report says students 1 through 5. I'm assuming it went on to 380 or 390. And I think what you're saying is that you're using this to do the deep dive and dig it out, and rather than present us with another 200 pages.
Correct.
Sure, and when, I think
That's
the
what I
other
think.
thing too, when we talk about using something at the building level, the way that I see that in my mind is there are things that I am charged with as the assistant principal of curriculum, that Kristen is charged with as the principal, that as building administrators, we sit and we talk about and we plan and we review the data and we look at programming and we make decisions for the building. And then that's what I mean when we talk about like a building level conversation, where it's Kristen and I getting into the nitty gritty of how do we help every single individual students. Whereas when we come to Dr. Skinkis and we talk to him, that's when we start saying things like, here are the things we need to be able to execute these things that we have discussed from a building administrative standpoint. That's when we involve the district and we start to report out. So I see it in my mind as we wouldn't necessarily come to you as a Board of Education every time we were going to say move a teacher from one class to another. So I was trying to make a sense of, in terms of the scope of the work, in terms of what Kristen and I do on a daily basis, and then what parts of that work that we do on a daily basis that we need to bring to the board to take action on or to provide updates about the district goals, rather than trying to articulate everything we do on a daily basis.
So getting back to where we started before Tim came in, have you finished presenting the report?
We have.
Okay, so we were gonna let them finish, and then I was gonna go to this side of the table and see what kind of questions we have, and then I'm gonna go to this side and see what we have.
So number one, I have a couple questions. So you're providing data to ECRA. Are they keying it in, or are you just electronically sending them the students' schedules and coursework, and they automatically are uploading this into a database? Or
Yes,
do
so
you guys
we download a report from our student information system and then send it to them, and they
Okay.
upload all that information in one place for
So
us.
if ECRA was to go away, it's our database, and we get that database back.
We would get the raw data back.
Correct.
So like we would get back our, let's say our list
All
of
the data that we provided.
all
We
juniors,
provided them
the test
we provided
scores.
them their class, what they got in their class, their ACT scores. We're providing them all the data. What ECRA's doing is putting it into some package. Are they doing any statistical analysis and said that out of the 95, based on taking this particular factor drives this? Or are you just getting simply going and saying student has this curve and this was the coursework that came with it?
Do you want to speak?
So is there,
Not-
you're able to
not-
get patterns out of this? Are they actually giving you statistical, do they go and do a regression analysis on it to see any correlation on a consistent pattern? Or are you just getting raw data that says, okay, student one had a drop in anticipated score, it should have been this, but it dropped this way, but there's no correlation with the other students?
So we don't necessarily get all of the data that you're looking for. The online portal has the ability to filter. So we've put in a lot of filters so that we can then determine and look at specific groups. So for example, we can look and filter by feeder school, we can look and filter by students in the reading program, we can filter by students who have met or not met a specific attendance criteria. We can look at students that have an IEP. And we drive all of those filters and information that we want to look at.
So you put a filter on it, then it.
Then it
it'll
gives you
give
the regression.
Saying that this was the growth associated with this
Correct.
filter?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Anything else on this side? Questions or comments, Laura?
Thank you for your report, and I think we need to also look at some of these reports. You know, our student counseling, they also have many batteries that they would give to the students, and we as a board would never see those student batteries, but we'd maybe get an aggregate report. So when we're thinking about building level and district level, I think that might help. And so I think you guys, what Kristen and Kylie are bringing to us is kind of the aggregate, the overall data, not each individual student, which you're able to see, and that's your job, not our job. And it's very analogous to what they do in student services, but with different needs.
Correct.
Yeah.
Anything over here?
Yeah, I have a question. So I know you break it down by individual students. Does that also feed over to the counselor saying, okay, guess what? We need to be able to bump him up a little bit, or, we need to watch. This is what we would recommend for scheduling wise. Do they look at that too?
Yes, one thing that's come out of particular program evaluations, not all, it depends on the program we're looking at, is looking at course taking patterns and the students that were more successful and grew more than we expected. Looking at those students have taken some different courses than students that haven't grown as much, whether it be an honors course or an AP course in a particular subject area. So then we can work with counselors to identify the students who would be appropriate to challenge them into one of those courses as well.
So the sample we have here just has numbers, but you're able to dig down and get a name if you need
Yeah,
to.
where you see on that page where you see the sample list of junior students, and it lists the student 1, student 2, where they would normally be names. For example, that list of students, based on those filters that Kristen mentioned, could look like any number of groups. We can look at the entire class. So we can have a list that has 300 students in it, or we could, if we're looking for something very, very specific, like we are looking at particular growth of our Hispanic students, for example, we can drill down, so we can manipulate those lists in any way we want to. Additionally, our teachers can go in, they can create lists of their own classes, so that our teachers can track their individual student data, and they can see the patterns from their students in class. They can go all the way down to one particular student if they wanted to. If they were saying, gosh, this, Johnny is just not performing like I would think he would on this unit assessment, and he normally does so much better than that. Let me see what I can find out. And all of that student data is in one place, readily accessible to a teacher to be able to say, oh, okay, there's some things that I can see here, some patterns that I can notice in the student growth that might even help them to make decisions in their classroom. So it can go even lower than where we're talking.
This has been very helpful, and not to prolong this, but just wonder, are teachers actually coming back to you and taking a look?
Yeah, I actually we're doing our summative evaluation process right now, and for our student growth component, the teachers who are on cycle have a data reflection component to that. And just yesterday, one of my English teachers came in, and she had done just that. She had gone into ECRA and she had created a class of just her particular students that she was tracking data, and it was able to do a couple of things. It was able to give her a visual, and so she could see where, I don't know if you remember back to when we had the scatter plot and we showed a sample, she was able to see where her students, her particular cohort of students, was fitting in that visual. She was actually able to share that with the students so that she could say, look, this is where this typical growth should be. This is where the benchmark is, and you can see where our class falls. And then she had also gone in and she had her list of all of her students, and she had gone in and made some notes about each one, and was really using that to, in this particular case, it was academic vocabulary data, to drive and focus her instruction for that particular class of students.
So the faculty in general is aware of what you can do, what's available?
Yes.
Good.
And I would also say the other benefit of the program evaluation is not the overall global analysis on the program and whether or not students in the program are growing more than students not in the program. That's only the tip of the iceberg. What's really important is being able to delve down into the individual student level to see why is it working for these students or why is it not working for these students, so that we can then make adjustments accordingly.
Thank you.
But for the board, the high level is what's important. It's how you justify, do we add a teacher? Do we spend more money on something, right?
I mean, we can certainly share all of the program evaluations
asking
with
you
you,
to
but
share. No,
but
I
that's
said the
not
high-level
the-
report that you said is not important. It's not important for an individual student, but it's important for the board because the purpose of hiring ECRA was to help justify whether we should add more teachers, whether we should do different programs, different courses, et cetera, right?
Sure, but that information doesn't tell you why it's being successful or why it's not being successful. It's also just one benchmark. So when you look at, for example, a reading program evaluation, we also look at all of the progress monitoring tools that we have within the class. When we look at a CAP evaluation, we look at all of the practice ACTs that they also take during the class. So there's a lot more that
Kristen.
goes into it than just the ACT benchmark.
I understand you love this program, but I'm trying to differentiate and see, I'm gonna keep trying, no matter how many, you explain how you like the detail, whether it's worth the $35,000 a year. Because the way you explained it now is, especially based on Gary's program, the question, unless we keep ECRA here, all this stuff we're doing goes away. So you have to make a long-term commitment, in essence, to make it a worthwhile program, to see if 5 years from now, did it really work the way we want? And again, in order for us to understand, whoever the board is here, they need to know, like, the overall program, because what is our growth? You know, the fact that you can see that out of the 400 students, some grew, some didn't, could you work with them? That's great. But if we need to say, well, adding a 2 FTE or 0.2 FTE on a reading was beneficial, and maybe if we add another 0.2 FTE, we think we get that growth again, that's how we need to make our decisions, right?
Right.
So, well, please, I don't want you to, if you don't mind. So the question I have is, when, we just hired ECRA last year, right? Like, when did we get the high-level reading growth junior ACT report from them? I thought they didn't give us reports last year yet, that you didn't get them till this year.
This is our third year with using ECRA, and
Oh, it's
we
the third
received we received the program evaluation in April 2016.
So April 2016 is the first time you got this reading program evaluation?
This reading program evaluation.
Okay. So if I go down to where I asked the questions and Kylie tried to answer, and I skipped one, we increased the FTE for literacy coaches, provide additional time and support for literacy instruction. Didn't we do that when we approved the budget last year, for this year? Kevin, do you remember?
Yes.
And the budget, your head count's provided to us like in March, isn't it?
Mhm.
So my problem is, after the fact, you got some justification from ECRA, but you came up with that idea by yourself, because you had to. You gave us the numbers before you got the report from ECRA.
Yeah, the literacy coaches are not necessarily teaching the reading course.
Okay.
The literacy, what we're doing with the literacy coaches is they're going in classes where there's non-reading students and teaching reading strategies to freshman teachers.
But my point is,
I get where you're going.
we
We're trying
made
to
the
justify resources.
when did we change the teacher evaluation? Didn't we do that a couple of years ago?
Right, but now, yes, but now, as Kylie was explaining, because of ECRA, they can go in and look at their individual students, and they can actually have all of that data, whereas that data wasn't available to them
But
prior
that's
to
not my
ECRA.
point. Again, you're using what you decided. That seems, now they're justifying it was right and supporting how ECRA has done a lot for us. But in fact, those two items, the administration decided on themselves before we even had any evidence from ECRA.
So this
Well, that's
is
not-
I think you're misconstruing the question. The This is the first year that student data component is part of the teacher's evaluation under the new plan, under our state model. So this is the first year that the teachers are giving a pre and post test on academic vocabulary. The data is being entered into ECRA, and it's now being used for teacher evaluation purposes. So this just started this year for our school.
But didn't you establish that that was going to be the method of doing it?
But we only
before that?
established that after we had ECRA and after we knew the capabilities of ECRA. We started creating that, so we had ECRA 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we started the Joint Evaluation Committee where we identified that we would be looking at academic vocabulary and reading by looking at the ECRA student growth model and providing that access to teachers on an individual student basis. So that 30% of the teacher's evaluation is solely built around the capacities that we have from ECRA.
Hold on a second. We had to approve the teacher evaluation program, didn't we? the
No.
board? I thought we approved that.
The board does not approve that.
Okay, so that's changed since the presentation you gave it to us a couple of years ago.
Correct.
Right.
It's
Remember
a new-
when,
it's
I
a
don't
new
remember
mandate
when
this
most of you
year.
got on the board, we had to do that para training.
Right.
Right.
That's when that whole cycle started, so then you had like the first 2 years of that para training was implementing a new evaluation model, then the third or fourth year is when you gotta start tracking student data. So to just circle back, I appreciate Tim's questions, because I understand where Tim's trying to tie this in, is that the administration, especially the building administration, is using ECRA data to justify the resources they're asking the superintendent, and in turn will eventually be asked the board, you know, so I understand that. And I just wanna make sure, like, back in October, when the first question started to come up because of the board report that ECRA gave to the school board about the cumulative data on the top 10 and some of the things the board had asked, there was question on the value of the contract and where were they getting everything from the contract. So all I'm trying to do is, by having the administration present this, is to show you we're making sure it's being used on a regular basis and we're getting our money's worth on a regular basis.
And I've come to kind of the same conclusion that I came to back then, which is, I don't know that we got what we were promised, okay? But I do, exactly what we were promised. But it sounds to me like it's providing valuable data. It's not a fortune. And, I mean, and I know my friend is getting at here, which is very understandable. But, I mean, this is valuable, right? You're using it, teachers are using it, it's serving an educational purpose. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So.
Is it helping students become better students at the school?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, you're right about the original stuff, Tim. But,
Can I add something, President?
Know that your side of the table is.
no.
So you're done, thank you.
If it's brief, John, yes.
It's brief. I mean, I'd like the administration to use this tool in an innovative way. And I think I stressed this at our meeting, in a way that if we're doing some type of intervention, this is a way to at least track historical standards. And that's what, I think we can be a role model for other schools too. So use it beyond what it's just typically used for, if you can.
And the problem with working with data is that now they gotta report back in April. They tweak some things over the summer, they're tracking. It's gonna take another year before we get these students comprehensive data. Then they gotta make changes. So it's not a fast-paced cycle of changes.
So based on the timing of this, the expectation is I should see ACC scores get off at 22.5, 23, in what year?
Well, so what I can tell you, and it'll be a spoiler alert, when we present the performance of our current senior class in the fall, as we typically do, those students as a whole have exceeded growth. So they didn't reach the 23, I will tell you that right now. However, they grew more than ECRA has predicted them to grow, which is based off of our typical growth in the past 6 years here at RB. So, they're not at the 23, but they've grown more than they should have, and that's a success.
So you're looking at that data to see what these students did.
Correct.
And trying to implement that with incoming freshmen so that we can have even bigger growth.
Correct.
All right. I thank both sides of the table for their fine input tonight. Anything further? Thank you for the report. The next item on the agenda is visitor comments. I'll look for hands in the audience of anyone wishing to speak.